By the time John came to see me, he had in fact pitched a few more games. He felt like he had done pretty poorly in those games as well. He had struck out a few people and gotten a few others out on ground balls and fly balls, but he had also had a few more walks and a few more home runs hit off him. When I pointed out the logical fact that he had struck some people out, therefore nullifying his fearful thought that he would never strike anyone out again, he was, of course, able to acknowledge that, but his brain persisted in conjuring up the fear that he would go out there and either walk or give up a hit to everyone he faced. In other words, he knew that his fears were not logical, or at least highly unlikely, but yet his brain continued to produce the fears as if they were a real possibility. John realized that he was in a downward spiral. The more tense he got, the more he tried to steer the pitch, rather than just rearing back and throwing it. Consequently, he was throwing more pitches out of the strike zone, and the ones in the strike zone were much easier to hit. He was giving up more hits than he'd ever had before. And in his words, "I know my thinking those negative thoughts is not helping me, but I just can't seem to stop thinking them." John had finally come to see me toward the end of the off-season, so at that time he was getting ready for the upcoming season. He was getting so worked up and so nervous about the start of the season that he was actually thinking about ways to just gracefully quit baseball altogether. The game he had loved since he was 6 years old was now something he feared. Rather than being excited about the start of the season, he was dreading it. How could this have happened? There is nothing quite so frustrating as knowing that we shouldn't be thinking a certain way, but feeling at a loss to make our brains stop thinking that way. John just wanted the nervousness to go away, back to how he was before that fateful trip to the mound that got this whole thing started. I just want to feel confident, like I used to. I used to love going out there to pitch. Now I find myself hoping I will sit the bench. How sad is that? So my first step was to explain to John what had happened in his brain. Deep in the heart of our brains is a region known as the limbic system. This system consists of the amygdala, hippocampus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Emotional life is largely housed in the limbic system. It has a great deal to do with the formation of memories as well. The amygdala, the hippocampus, and the thalamus are all involved in motivation, emotion, learning, and memory. While the structures in this highly developed part of the brain interconnect, research has shown that the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep inside the brain, and the hippocampus, a tiny seahorse-shaped structure connected directly to it, really seem to be the main areas involved with emotions. The amygdala is actually one of two almond-shaped clusters of nerve cells that lie just below the temporal lobe of the cerebrum on both sides of the brain. Amygdalae, the plural form, are responsible for preparing the body for emergency situations such as being startled, and for storing memories of events for future recognition. Amygdalae assist in the development of memories, particularly as they relate to emotional events and emergencies. The amygdalae are also specifically involved in the development of the fear emotion and can be the cause of extreme expressions of fear, as in the case of panic. The hippocampus is an adjacent section of the limbic system, and it's responsible for converting short-term memories into long-term memories. The hippocampus allows for a person to compare the conditions of a present threat with similar past experiences, thus enabling one to choose the best option in order to survive. The thalamus is one of the busiest parts of the brain and is mainly concerned with homeostasis. Homeostasis is the process of returning something to some set point. It works like a thermostat. When the room gets too cold, the thermostat conveys that information to the furnace and turns it on. As the room warms up and the temperature gets beyond a certain point, it sends a signal to the furnace to turn it off. The furnace in this case, is the sympathetic nervous system's response to danger, dumping adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol into the system. The hypothalamus is responsible for regulating hunger, thirst, responses to pain, levels of pleasure, sexual satisfaction, anger, and aggressive behavior, as well as other things. It also regulates the function of the autonomic nervous system, which in turn means it regulates things like pulse, blood pressure, breathing, and arousal in response to emotional circumstances. There was nothing wrong with John's limbic system. It was working just fine, doing what it does best, alerting John to potential danger. The only problem is there was no real danger. The system had simply been kicked into overdrive.